when people like you, they often like you not because of what you do, but in spite of what you do.
The life lessons are based on every single interaction that we have. That's being a student of life.
And that real work for me is finding that place inside myself where I know that all is well.
When we lead with relationship, that lays such a fertile foundation for us to really have a healthy conversation.
So the key and the challenge is to let yourself be in the storm if necessary without letting the storm be in you. The problem isn't being in the storm. The problem is the storm being in you.
Welcome to What's Possible, a show for high performers who want to take their leadership, well-being, and overall life satisfaction to the next level. I'm Eileen Schaefer, and today we're talking about managing difficult people and tough conversations. Have you ever dreaded interacting with someone? Wish you didn't need to have a conversation, but had no choice? Ever felt some angst at starting the day because you had to deal with someone who drains the life out of you? Unfortunately, interacting with tough people is not always a choice. While you might not be able to difficult people or tough conversation proof your life, you can learn some tips and tricks for how to best manage these situations. Today's your lucky day. I invited Robert Mack, executive coach and expert in well-being, to join the conversation. Robert will help us answer these two questions. What are the secrets to managing difficult people and conversations? And how can you protect yourself and not get sucked into all that negative energy? Robert is an SVC coach, former Deloitte consultant, graduate from the master's program in positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, frequent TV guest, and author of one of my favorite books, Happiness from the Inside Out. Welcome, Robert. I'm so happy you're here today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Ivy.
Absolutely. You know, it's so funny. I was thinking about this conversation with you, and I thought, okay, who is one of the least difficult people who I would ever, never have a challenging conversation with? And I'm like, that would be Robert Mack. So it's so funny that that's the topic for today.
You don't know how much I appreciate you saying that, Eileen, because I don't want to be a difficult person. I'm sure lots of people have found me difficult over the years. I think I've learned a lot about not being difficult, I hope, and certainly helping other people deal with difficult people.
Oh, I love that. I love that it's something that you've grown from or grown within this topic too. Oh, I want to hear more about that. So before we dive into that piece of it, I'm so curious. Most people, if you talk to them about difficult people, difficult conversations, they're like, no, thank you. I do not want to even touch that with a 10-foot pole. So what brought you in to really kind of looking at it, maybe from an intellectual standpoint, but also from diving in personally? Wow,
that's a powerful question. I'd say first and foremost, despite the sheer impossibility of avoiding difficult people in this life, there's that first and foremost. It's just impossible to sort of avoid difficult people, all day, every day, forever. You're going to bump into somebody at some point that's difficult. There was that. Secondly, I discovered that growing up, my inability to sort of address or communicate with difficult people in a way that was productive and profitable, hopefully for both of us, not for, certainly for me, that was getting in the way of me experiencing a fuller, more fulfilling life, and also getting things done and accomplished. But then I'd say third, probably and most importantly, is that I realized that as much as I'd like to pride myself on not being a difficult person, I would say that of all the difficult people in my entire life I've ever had to connect with or communicate with or avoid, I was the most difficult person out of all for me to deal with. You know what I mean? It was all about me. I was like, man, I can complain all day long about all these other difficult people, but actually I'm my own greatest critic and worst enemy and most difficult person. So once I discovered that, I was like, wow, if I can figure that piece out, maybe I can also extract some lessons there and apply it to other difficult people in the world who are outside of me, who aren't me.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I love that. Well, and it goes back to your book title, Happiness from the Inside Out. It all begins inside.
Yes, without question. That's the most important piece of all. And I think it's an easy part to overlook because sometimes we just want to get on and over it, whatever that conversation is or whatever that difficult person, is doing to us or not doing to us. We just want to get on with it. But the truth is it does require going inside.
It's so funny that you say that. I used to always say, and I guess I probably still say to my daughters, when one person irritates you, it's a good chance it's them. Two, it's questionable. But when you're walking through your day and three people piss you off, chances are it might be you. And it's one of those things that I've noticed. Like if everybody's kind of rubbing me wrong, I'm like, ooh, Eileen, you need to take a pause, maybe take a walk and figure out what's going on inside, because chances are three people are not going to be the bad guy during the day.
Absolutely. The common element there is you or me or whoever, you're right. So it's a good point that you make. And I think that's also something easy to overlook. Sometimes we just think, the world is bad and people in general are difficult. It's true. People are very peoply. I think Paul Sartre said, hell is other people, and so there could be some truth to that for sure. But when you find that everyone seems difficult, or most people seem difficult, then you really do have to do a deeper dive within yourself and sort of get that, clarity and awareness there before you go out into the world and project it all into somebody else.
So I'm hearing, and we'll get into really more and more of the secrets, but I'm hearing for yourself, you really turned the lens on yourself. You changed how you showed up and really got clear on, okay, what's going on inside and what do I need to do? Once you realize that secret that we will get more detailed about, what changed for you?
I think the first thing I came to understand was that most people are operating from a place of projection. Right. I think it's like the first rule of psychology really is projection. Even the good stuff, So if I say, Eileen, you want a glass of water? It's not that I don't care about Eileen. It's not that I don't care about you. I certainly do. But it probably occurred to me that I'm thirsty. I'm heading to the refrigerator anyway. Right. Or I want Eileen to really like me. And so I project this desire onto Eileen, which is really a desire that I have to be liked or to have a glass of water. And so once you discover that, then it's easier to remember that you don't need to personalize anything that anyone says to you or doesn't say to you or does to you or doesn't do to you, just because they're using your name, right? Most of what we have going on inside of us at any point in time has a lot more to do with us than it does any particular or specific person. So that was huge for me. It was like, Rob, most people aren't thinking poorly about you because most people aren't thinking about you at all.
That's a big life lesson to get. Yep.
Yeah. They're much more self-absorbed and self-interested in that. And it's actually a good thing. You don't want people thinking about you all the time. They don't need to. They have their own worries and concerns and desires and dreams to realize.
Oh, I love that. And then it's so liberating too, because then you're operating in your zone of control. Once you stop thinking of it as being an other and you realize this is a me thing, then you have a sense of control too, in terms of how you walk through the world.
Oh, you just nailed it. That's huge. I mean, it's interesting. I think so many of us think that other people like or don't like us, that like or dislike us based on, how we show up or don't show up in the world. But the truth is most people are carrying around their own little criteria of what makes for a good person or a bad person or a likable person or an unlikable person. So it's really just them checking off their boxes. And once you come to discover that, and you come to discover too that people see everything through their own filter, through their own lens, through their own separate psychological reality, and that when people like you, they often like you not because of what you do, but in spite of what you do, right? They like you for all kinds of reasons that have to do with you. And also when they don't like you, they don't like you not because of what you do or don't do, but often in spite of what you do and don't do. And so that does free you up to focus on the one thing that you can control, which is not other people, not what they think, not what they say, not what they do, but what you think and what you say and what you do. And then sort of when you take back control, it's so much easier, first of all, to find peace and joy and self-love and love. And second of all, you find that your powers of persuasion and influence increase exponentially.
Yeah, that's the what's in it for you piece of this whole pie. Yeah,
that's right.
Definitely. So let's give some kind of meat to what we're talking about. So when we're talking about difficult people, just complete this sentence. Difficult people are those people who
trigger you, or make you feel defensive, or make you feel reactive, or make you feel down or sad or upset or depressed or lonely, any of the things, right? I mean, you can essentially, and then we all sort of define that differently. Sure, we could talk about it from a more clinical perspective, but we don't need to do that. Anyone who disturbs your peace for any reason at any time, we might call and qualify as difficult. Now, does that make them difficult? Not necessarily, but for you, it does.
Right. I love how you qualified that. I'm right in the middle of doing 2 360s for some leaders who I'm working with. And what I love about the 360 that we do, it's all interview based. And we interview whether it's the peers, direct reports, people who my leader reports into. And some stuff that works for a peer might not work for the person you're, reporting into, or someone who's reporting into you. And so what I love about it is it's something that might irritate one person or trigger one person is the thing somebody else loves about you. So when we start to know how to show up with different people, it also can shift our world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is very Shakespearean in the, sense that it's like there is no good and bad, only thinking makes it so. Right? And it's hard to remember that, right? That heaven and hell are right there in your attitude and the way in which you look at things and the way in which you perceive things. And that's can be dramatically different from how somebody else perceives or experiences something or someone. So you're absolutely right about that. I found that and discovered that with coaching too. I mean, especially early in my practice, gosh, I had some clients that were like, oh my gosh, Robert Mack is the best thing since sliced bread. Oh my gosh, this guy's amazing. And then I had other people think, this guy is the worst thing ever. Like, I can't possibly get away from him fast enough. And I just thought, how interesting. I delivered the same exact service. In fact, I probably even tried harder with the person who I felt like didn't like me very much. And still, it didn't change one, speck of how they felt or thought about me. And so, yeah, it's fascinating, this reality of separate psychological realities.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you have so nailed it. And it's so funny because I truly could not imagine somebody not loving working with you. And of course, I have the privilege of reading the evaluations of the people who get to work with you, and you kind of hit it out of the park every time. However, I'm sure I'm going to trust you and believe that you've had a few people who have not felt that way, but I haven't met them yet. So I just need to.
That's a good thing. We'll keep them as far away from you as humanly possible. And I have to say, I don't really remember too many of them because I have what my mom would call godly amnesia. I've been working on that for a very long time, just trying to forget the bad. It's so helpful in terms of living a great, happy, and peaceful life. But yeah, it's easy, of course, too, Eileen, when you're connecting with and interacting with people who are so easy to deal with. Well, of course, it makes it easy. I mean, you're such a beautifully sort of complex and sophisticated, but simple person to interact with because you're always so positive and encouraging. So it's easy.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, and it makes me think also just about that negative bias. I love that your mom said the godly amnesia, which is such a beautiful way to put it and such a healthy way, obviously, to go through life because we do have that as humans. It's part of our part of our history is to be able to protect ourselves. So that negativity bias, that's a little bit stronger in some people than others. And so when we get that one, negative feedback or something, we can latch onto it and it screams, whereas the positive feedback is whispering quietly. And if we could turn the volume up on what the positive, and for the ones that are not so positive, figuring out, as you said, how do I work with these people? How do I enter these difficult situations?
Oh, wow. That's so powerful. And you're right. I mean, it goes back to that expression that, we don't see the world, we see ourselves. We project it onto the world. Yeah. That filter, that lens, that negativity bias, in other cases, hopefully it's a positivity bias, means everything. I remember having a manager early in my career who said, here, Rob, we all assume positive intent. And we keep assuming a positive intent until they've proven us wrong, basically 77 times 7 kind of thing. And I was like, I love that. And it's fascinating because it often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you look, you tend to find what you look for. And when you get this negativity bias, filter on, you tend to see it everywhere. It's like those old school Tootsie Roll commercials where the little boy was walking around and everything would turn into a Tootsie Roll as soon as he looked at it because he just was obsessed with Tootsie Rolls. Same thing with negativity. Everything turns into something negative. And I did early in my life decide to try very hard to start taking everything as a compliment. It's like, can I start taking everything as a compliment? And can I try to also express what I think and feel, even if it's a hard truth, even if it's meant to be something constructive in terms of feedback? Can I say it in a way that keeps the other person's mind and heart open to receive it? And can I say it in a way that's encouraging and validating and supportive and loving, but still be true and honest about it? And I discovered that you can. You most certainly can. It takes a little practice, so it's an art and it's a science and it's a skill. But it's incredibly important to recognize the negativity bias, do what you can to manage it or navigate around it, and then both think and speak in ways that support others, that encourage others, and that help them get the best out of themselves.
I love that because right there, you're talking about both walking into a difficult situation, and it might be with someone who you have a challenge, say, managing. So I would love an example. So let's say you're giving feedback to somebody. How might you do it in practical terms so our listener gets a real taste of it?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think first, for me, I'm always wanting, if I can, to be the change that I want to see in the other person. It's important to me. I'm selfish, okay? Part of that is just I like to feel good, and I like to make sure I'm trying to live my truth. I'm, sort of living the sermon kind of thing. So that's first and foremost. So for me, in all situations, that means let me self-regulate. Let me regulate my emotion. Let me try to find peace and joy and happiness first. Just because this feedback might be perceived or experienced as negative, I don't need to go in that way. So that's the first piece is that. And then when I start the conversation, for me, it's all about positivity, warmth, and rapport building. This is another human being on the other side of the table, on the other side of the phone or the Zoom call. And so I want to really lean into the relational as opposed to transactional experience with this human being. How you doing? How you feeling today? How's life going? This is whatever the feedback is, whatever the difficult conversation is. It's just a tiny little sliver and slice of everything else that's going on in the world and their lives and my lives. Let's connect on that level. And so I do what I can there. And then often there's a little opening that happens where they share something that maybe isn't going so great, they're not feeling great about, maybe something that they're feeling wonderful about. But then I just want to pull on that, sort of tease that out a little bit. Tell me about that. What are you thinking there? What are you feeling there? And if I want, I could always ask questions in a way that lead people to share in a confidently vulnerable way, knowing that it's a safe space and place, what their concerns are about their performance or about their relationship with their husband or their wife or their kids or whatever it is. Ideally, I don't want to give any feedback at all that doesn't already resonate with them on some level. And if they can come to that discovery and recognition first, I not only have avoided having a really uncomfortable conversation that might not be well received, but I've also deepened this positive relationship that I have with this person and let them come to their own realization discovery around that, which is so much more powerful than anything I could possibly say, anything that anybody could possibly say. So for me, it's a lot of open-ended questions. It's staying in rapport. It's teasing things out. We sometimes talk about motivational interviewing. It's just another way of talking about getting to the heart or the core, the essence of what this other person is feeling or experiencing. And sometimes you have to take little sort of leaps in the conversation where you help them connect the dots. And if and when that doesn't work, we can always move on to sort of option B or C here, which might be a little bit more assertive, but it's still just as loving and caring and compassionate.
What I love about what you said is you led with relationship. When we lead with relationship, when we lead with connecting with the human on whether it's on the other side of the table or across the screen or whatever that looks like, that lays such a fertile foundation for us to really have a healthy conversation, as opposed to, I think oftentimes we go into these difficult situations and our head is racing with what we need to say that we forget, okay, I'm talking to a human. I'm talking to someone I care about. Let me connect with them first. And then I love how you took it to, chances are we know we're all energetically connected at some level. Chances are the person is probably feeling some of this already, and to give them space to share is a real powerful way to enter that.
Absolutely. I mean, beautifully stated, really eloquent. And you're right about that. I think, especially when I was just starting my executive coaching journey, I looked so much younger than I was. And that was really hard, especially for very senior people that have been doing their job for a very long time or doing extraordinarily well at it. And maybe they had picked up a few habits that weren't serving them well. And maybe they even thought those bad habits, in some cases being a difficult person, was contributing to their success. So the first couple conversations were always so hard because they're like, what's this young kid have to say to me about anything? And I can't blame them for that at all. I'm like, I recognize that. And so in the beginning, I realized that instead of trying or attempting to tell them anything, even something that I might be deeply educated in, like positive psychology, I was so much better off just saying, "Hey, how you feel? How you feeling? How are things going? Talk to me a little bit about the job. What do you love and what are you hating? What's the perception that other people have of you?" And I discovered that if I was just really relaxed about it and genuine and relational, they would begin sharing more and more. And as long as I just stayed curious and stayed out of that space of judgment, because I think that's a challenge when you go into a conversation and you're wanting to sort of share something very difficult, you can find yourself already having some judgments about the other person. And to your point, Eileen, they feel that. They pick up on that. They may not recognize or realize they pick up on it, but you'll feel it. You'll notice they get resistance. They get resistant. They get defensive. They get a little reactive. And then you get defensive. You get reactive. You get resistant. And it just becomes this negative little spiral. It's a vicious cycle that is hard to get out of. So, key there then, again, is you got to maintain your own peace and self-regulate. You want to be very relational. You want to ask a lot of open-ended, non-judgmental, curious questions. You want to keep peeling that onion layer back. And you also want to do, I think, what you can to, at some point, begin moving in a more positive direction. So one of the sort of discoveries I made was that we can either talk about the past undesirable behavior that we want to extinguish, right? You were late 44 times this year. Or we could talk about the present and future desirable behavior that we want to feed and fuel. Gosh, the day goes so much better when we're all on time. It doesn't feel like that much of a difference. It feels like just semantics. But there's a way and a practice and an art to be able to reframe what you want to say such that it's true, it's more helpful than what you had originally planned, it's more inspiring than what you originally had planned, you only share the necessary parts, might not remind them it's 44 times, and kind, K. But the whole idea is let's focus on the positive, desirable behavior that we want to feed and fuel and try to stay off of and away from the undesirable behavior that we want to extinguish.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we get more of what we focus on, right? So if we want the positive behavior, and it makes me think of my mom used to always say, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So you're saying the same thing. You're not encouraging, I'd love you to be late 45 times because you've already been late 44, but instead you're talking about what's right and what you want to see. It's like, let's paint that beautiful picture together for the future.
Oh, that's so good, Eileen. You're absolutely right about that. It's sort of the difference between sort of being an observer, so to speak, and a visionary. A visionary has a way of communicating even tough messages in ways that inspires people. We all want to rise up and do something really amazing, and it can be so activating. And you're also right. You said something else there really powerful too, which is that when you're having these conversations, you really want to make sure that you're sort of pushing the right lever, right? We often assume that what motivates us or inspires us will motivate and inspire the other person, but that's simply not true. Some people are motivated and inspired by money or by power or prestige, and other people aren't. Some people want recognition. Some people want, they don't want recognition. They want to stay hidden. They want to remain anonymous. Maybe they're more inspired and motivated to, maybe they want to retire. So part of the conversation, and the reason it's important to have an open-ended conversation if you can, and a very open-minded one, is because you're trying to understand not only how this person sort of perceives and experiences the world and other people and themselves, but you're also trying to understand what are the levers that I need to push or help them push themselves so that they can hear and receive this feedback or have this difficult conversation with me, but also do it or do whatever it is that we want them to do, what they need or want to do for themselves, but do it in a really excited way, a positive way, right? Because we can often get people to do all kinds of things if we scare them enough and pump enough fear into them and create enough urgency around it. That's true, but just not very sustainable.
Definitely. Well, and one other thing, just kind of thinking about what you want when you're talking to the person, I always say, if I'm going to go into a difficult conversation or I'm coaching somebody who is, one of the questions I always ask myself or others is, when you leave that conversation, either when you hit end on Zoom or you walk out the door of the meeting, whatever that looks like, when you leave, what do you want to think, feel, and do? And what do you hope the other person thinks, feels, and does, so that you really get to, what do I want from this meeting? And if you want to piss someone off, there's definitely a direction you can go to create that. Or you can really think thoughtfully about, I really like this person. I do want this behavior or this attitude or something to change, because they're a huge value add, whether it's to my life, whether it's to my business, whether it's to the team. And this needs to change. So I want them to stay, but this has got to change. So you really need to think through, okay, how do I want them to leave? What do I want them to think, feel, and do upon leaving?
Oh, so poignant. I mean, gosh, you couldn't say that enough times with enough emphasis. I mean, it's just so beautiful and so powerful. And you're right about that. And the challenge and opportunity is to think that, feel that, and be doing a version of that yourself, right? It's so easy to go in these conversations, be a hypocrite. I mean, the one thing I've discovered about being a coach is that every piece of advice I've ever given anybody else is always first and foremost meant for me. Whatever it is, I'm the one person I can trust and know is listening, first of all. And second of all, I'm also quite aware that, each individual and human being is their own person, and their life and their work is their job and their responsibility, their pleasure and their privilege. And mine is mine. And if I can sort of stay out of, which is hard to say as a coach, but stay out of this whole behavior change business, right? 20 years ago, I was like, I'm getting the behavior change business. And I'm going to help people make changes. And that's what we do for sure. But I gave myself too credit and also too much responsibility for what other people did and did not do. The most I can do is not, get in the way of them making change. I can help to facilitate it. I can help to pre-pave it. I can help to prepare the ground so that it can happen. But none of us can do push-ups for anyone else, right? And so the challenge and opportunity there is like, let me try and live this first myself, okay? And then I don't have to do such a hard job of trying to convince this other person that they should get on board too, because the passion, enthusiasm, and sincerity will come through effortlessly. But that question you ask, Eileen, is just so powerful and so profound, because you're right. It's a question that you want to ask about them, and then it's one you want to live yourself as well.
Well, it's so funny when you say that about the clients. I have talked to so many coaches about that. And always the issue that the client brings, you're like, oh, wow, that's wild that they brought this today. And so I think we are probably the most self-coached people on the planet, because of all these amazing interactions we're having with our clients, where we learn and grow every time. Yeah, we're with a client.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and I think that's a lot of the reason that most of us got into coaching or being a professional helper or therapist, whatever it might be out there. It's like I got into it selfishly. So I was like, I got some stuff I need to work on. I have to do some fixing here. And I need to make a career out of it. I don't think I can just do it part-time and fix all the stuff I've got going on. I'm going to have to dedicate my whole life to it, kind of thing. So it's funny that it turned into, a career in a more formal way. But I'm so grateful it did, because my clients are so fantastic. They're so enlightening, and often they think, I'm sure, that I'm just sharing with them. But every time they share something with me, I learn and I'm enlightened and I remember something that I want to or need to remember.
Yeah. My dad actually wrote a book years and years ago. It's called Buddha in the Waiting Room. And he's a Western trained physician, retired now. But he used to say he learned so much from all his patients. And just all of the interactions that he had. And so he actually wrote a book on just the learning he had. And I think oftentimes when we go into situations, if we think that we are the expert, we have all the answers, we miss all of life's lessons. The life lessons are based on every single interaction that we have. That's being a student, a student of life. I was just watching now I can't remember what show. Oh, it's on Daisy Jones and the Six. I just watched that series. And there's an episode where one of the characters says, I'm a student of life. But I think we all are hopefully students of life. We come curious and learn from everybody who we have the privilege to meet.
Oh my gosh, there's nobody on the planet who I've ever encountered that I didn't learn something from. Everybody has an expertise of in a knowledge somewhere. They have a pocket of expertise and knowledge in something that you don't have, guaranteed. Every single person on the planet. So there's something to learn from everyone. And I love this Buddha in the Waiting Room. Oh my gosh, this book, I've just added it to my Amazon list as you were sharing there. And one of the things I say at the end of sessions, and it's for me, as much as it is for any client, and I'm open to being wrong about all of this. I'm willing to be wrong if it means you being more peaceful or happier or more successful. Please let me be wrong, because, and I have to remind myself that the goal here is not to be right, the goal is to be helpful, and the goal is to be, help this person create more happiness and success and peace. And I also want to create more happiness, peace, and success in my own life. So that's an important recognition there, Eileen, which is to choose happiness, success, health, whatever it might be, over being right. Being right is often a lot of hot air anyway.
Yeah. Yes. Without question. Without question. So we've talked a lot about what to do in both with people as well as situations. What should our listeners definitely not do? I think it's always good to kind of call that out too. We, as people in the space of positive psychology, we often really like to focus in on, okay, this is what we want to see more of, as we just discussed. But I'm gonna put a little scratch in that record and say, okay, what do we not want to be doing?
You don't want to preach. You don't want to preach to people. That doesn't work or go very well. I mean, if you're a preacher, for sure, they came there for that. But, in most everyday life, you don't want to be preaching at people. You don't want to assume that what worked for you will work for them, or what's worked for anybody else will work for them. You also don't want to assume that you know what is in the best interest of anybody at any point in time in like a hard and fast way. You just don't. I mean, the very thing that this person is doing that you seem to be resisting so much, or you want them not to do, might be the very thing that saves their lives one day. And that doesn't mean that you can't still communicate yourself, with authority and with sincerity and with conviction, but you want to leave room for the possibility that you could be wrong, or that you could be mistaken, or you could be confused, or this person might be the exception. In 20 years, like I said, in doing this work, I'm convinced that happiness comes from the inside out. I wrote the whole book about it, right? At the same time, I'm also aware, and I tell this to clients all the time, you might be the one exception. You might find perfect happiness in not ever going inside and just filling up that bank account with more and more and more money and more stress. Do what you got to do. Like, I'm open to being wrong. So you figure that out, come back, report to me, and we'll write a book together called Happiness from the Outside In. But I just think it's important to remember that part too. And then I'd say, also try not to personalize it. At the end of the day, people do and don't do things for all kinds of reasons. They have 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years of life experience behind them that they may have learned from. They may have also mislearned from. There's a lot of programming conditioning. You're not going to change that overnight, right? You're not going to have one conversation with people usually and have a brand new person at the end of that conversation. But if you're lucky enough, you might plant some seeds. And if you continue watering those seeds with, love and conviction and some open-mindedness and non-judgment, you might find that those seeds grow into these really beautiful, tall, fruitful trees, which can be extraordinarily rewarding. But try not to make such a big deal of it. Also, I'd say don't avoid humor. Let there be a little levity in the experience, the conversation. It helps, a little bit of sugar helps the medicine go down, kind of thing. And most fully, I'd say be yourself, but be your best version of yourself. Try not to be the worst version.
That's not going to be getting you anywhere if you walk in as the worst version. No. Yeah. And I like that personalizing, really thinking clearly about, okay, this isn't about me. And the one other thing that two things that I try to live by, and of course, my family is sick of me saying, however, I'll often say is assume good intent and give space for grace. Because oftentimes we'll go into these tough conversations and we assume they have horrible intentions. And that just sets the tone right there. And we don't give space for them to grow. So if we can give that space, we can get to that other side.
Oh, it's so powerful and profound. You're right about that. I mean, I think underneath almost every seemingly ill-intentioned behavior comment is fear and insecurity and uncertainty and instability. It's most people are not bad people. Most people are really good people, and they want other people to think and know that they're good people. They're afraid. There's lots for us to find to be afraid of, right? Afraid of death, afraid of getting sick, afraid of losing our jobs, afraid of not being perceived, well or positively, afraid of somebody not liking us. I mean, the list goes on and on. But ultimately, underneath all of that is just fear. It's just fear. And that's why when you create a safe space and unconditional regard, true transformation happens, because then grace can enter and turn things around, right? I mean, they've done studies and they found, they looked at all of the different forms of therapy and schools of therapy. And they said, what's the most effective form of therapy overall? And they said, that form or school doesn't matter so much. It's the therapist, him or herself. And they said, well, what is it about the therapist? And they said, it's the therapist's ability to exercise unconditional regard, which means leaving space for grace to enter. It means not being judgmental. It means just being there as a presence, your sheer presence, even without a whole lot of thinking, without any words at all, just that stillness and silence, like really embodying that in and of itself can be transformative. We've all had those experiences before where you just sit with someone, you don't say a whole lot, you just sit in that place inside yourself that's perfectly peaceful and know that it's all is well. And they come to their own little epiphanies, their own little insights. So what you just said, Eileen, is so much more profound than we can put words to, because it is about something that's ultimately wordless, which is a transformation that happens, a lightning strike that happens without you doing or saying a whole lot, just you being a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And that safe space is, it's essential. It's really essential. Now, this is kind of my last question as part of this. And then of course we have all our traditional wrap-ups. But when you walk into a tough conversation, or you're walking into a situation with someone who really rubs you wrong, or you're coaching someone around this, what do you do before you even walk into that conversation? Whether it's mindset, whether it's exercise, what is something that you do to kind of get you in the place you need to be, or help a client get into that place?
So I actually think this might be the most important question of the entire conversation. That's saying a lot, because I felt like that way about every question. But I will say,
I'm glad I found one really important question.
No, I mean, I felt that way about every question. So every time the question comes up, I'm like, oh, okay, this is the most important one. That's this one. So yes, every question has been extraordinarily, and it has been the most important one until the next one's come. And I would say that with respect to the real work of navigating difficult conversations, the real work in anything, is not the time you spend in the difficult conversation. If you wait until you're in the difficult conversation to try and apply all this stuff, it just doesn't go very well. Okay. The real work comes before any and every difficult conversation. And that real work for me is finding that place inside myself where I know that all is well. So no matter what outcome appears as a result of this conversation, meaning maybe I freak out, maybe I get anxious or fearful, maybe the other person does get reactive or defensive, maybe they take it all the wrong way and they go off the handle. Whatever it is, I try to find that place within myself where I know that all is always well despite appearances. And I just want to sit there, I want to rest there, I want to spend as much time as I can there for its own sake, for joy's sake, for peace's sake, for love's sake alone. That's the real work for me. It's just, I'll call it practicing the presence, but it's sitting in that place where you know that all is well and nothing can truly go wrong. That takes a lifetime to sort of develop and cultivate and maintain in some ways, but it's also the most enjoyable and rewarding work I think you can do. So for me, that's number one. And if I do that, everything else falls into place. That doesn't necessarily mean I always, or anybody's going to say the right things or do the right things, and then it's going to go just as you had imagined or planned. But the likelihood of it going that way will be much higher. And you'll come out on the other end, no matter how it turns out, and still feel intact, still feel whole, not feel like you're in shambles or unsettled in the same way. Because it was just a conversation.
I love that we've brought up so many P's, but that perspective, is really perspective and presence. And it makes me think of one yoga teacher who used to always talk about yoga is really about finding the calm within, even when there's a storm around you. And that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, you're not going to learn how to swim in a storm. Please don't try, right? You learn to swim before the storm, ideally. And that also doesn't mean that you can't, make a lot of headway in the storm if you're just learning that. That's okay too, because we need the storms in order to encourage us to practice. But you're absolutely right about that. The problem isn't being in the storm. The problem is the storm being in you. Right? Mm. The problem isn't when the boat is in the water. The problem is when the water is in the boat. Okay. So trying to avoid and escape, right? Difficult people, trying to escape the ocean, trying to escape the storm, not really the way to go about it. Because it is true, even though it sounds like a cliche, but cliches are cliches for a reason. What you run from, you run to. What you run from, you run to. If you run from difficult people, you will run to difficult people. You're taking yourself with you wherever you go, right? So the key and the challenge is to let, yourself be in the storm if necessary without letting the storm be in you. Let yourself be in the ocean if necessary without, letting that sort of ocean water get inside the boat that is you. That's the challenge and that's the opportunity. We can all do it. If I can do it, Lord knows anybody and everybody can do it. It's the most stressed out, anxious, conflict avoiding person. I still don't like conflict. I'll do anything to avoid it.
That is the perfect place to kind of put a bow on this conversation. And now I'm going to ask you some key things that we always ask our guests. So when you think about Robert Mack, how do you set your day up for success? What's one morning ritual that you would never let go of?
Yeah, boy. I would say what I call practice in the present. Some people might call it meditation. Some people might call it contemplative prayer. It doesn't matter what religious or spiritual or non-religious or non-spiritual tradition you come from. For me, it's simply letting go of my thoughts and feeling into the peaceful aliveness in my body. That peaceful aliveness is what I call life. And that life is what we all exist as. That intelligence, whatever it is, it's the same intelligence that rotates the earth on its axis, revolves around the sun, makes the sun shine, makes the rain fall, makes the grass grow, whatever that is. Okay, we can all agree it's inside of us, and I'd argue it is us. So I just spend time, I guess I'll call it communing. It's just spending time with that the way I would spend time with you, Eileen, the way I would spend time with a friend or my mom, for joy's sake alone. Okay, I'm not trying to accomplish anything. I don't think I'm being ethical or moral. I'm not being spiritual. I'm just experiencing and feeling into the peaceful aliveness of my body for its own sake, knowing that whatever that life energy is, it goes before me, prepares my day. It helps my day go more sort of seamlessly and a lot more beautifully and a lot more happily and successfully. So that's the one practice I would let go of. I was going to say exercise, but who knows, one day I might have to let go of that. I hope not. But that's the one thing I know that no matter what, if I'm aware, I can always participate.
Yeah. And even just watching you describe that, obviously our listeners don't get to see you describing it, but I had the benefit of that. And I could just see you going inside as you're talking about it and just getting that pure sense of grounding. It was beautiful to watch you describe that ritual.
Oh, I so appreciate that, Eileen. Yeah, it's incredible that you say that. I don't think anything I've ever discovered in terms of tools or technologies or practices has ever been able to rival that blissfulness that I feel when I just tap into that.
Yeah. And I love, like you said, it will last with you through every stage of life. So, all right. So, favorite book that you have read recently. And I know Robert is one of those people who has read every single book. So my guess is it's hard to pick one.
So hard. It's like just like choosing your favorite child or your favorite organ, your favorite friend. It's so hard. It is. I mean, you nailed it. That could only come from another voracious reader. So there's two. One is for probably the more business-oriented folks, and it plays well with others. Great book. Check that one out. And the other book is The Heart of Mysticism. Just a phenomenal book. I mean, it's one of those books that you read and then you highlight and then you read again and then you underline, and before you know it, you've highlighted the entire book, underlined the entire book. It's like that. I have so many books like
yes.
that.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And people around you who maybe aren't readers, they're like, what are you doing? Why would you highlight anything if you're going to highlight everything?
We are speaking the same language. I do the same. And then I'll put like stickies all throughout. Well, when you have so many stickies, it doesn't, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yes.
It gets to lose its meaning for everybody else. But for me, I'm like, no, they all matter still.
Yeah. Exactly. It's just that good. Okay. So thank you for adding two books to my list and to our listeners' list. So our 3 giveaways that we do every time is, what is the one big takeaway from our conversation today that you hope our listeners leave with?
Learn to tell yourself and tell everyone else. In other words, talk to yourself and talk to everyone else by telling the truthful, better feeling story about everything and everyone. So there's always at least 2 ways to say something, many, many more. There's the truthful, worse feeling story, and there's the truthful, better feeling story. And I'm encouraging everyone, first and foremost myself, to talk to yourself and talk to others by telling the truthful, better feeling story.
Oh gosh, you've got my brain going wild right now. Love, love, love that. Okay. One mindset shift that you're hoping we leave with.
The peace that you hope to discover or find through that difficult conversation or with that difficult person is already within you. And you can tap into that in any moment in time, even if and when you're in that difficult conversation. Right? So you can find peace and happiness and harmony, even with difficult people, even if they don't find it with you, because you have it within you. So I'd say that this shift here is we're not trying to change difficult people. We're not trying to convince them of anything. We're not trying to persuade them or influence them. The work is really within ourselves. We're trying to convince and persuade, influence ourselves to a deeper felt sense of peace that's unshakable and immovable and unconditional in its nature. It's already there, but that's the goal. That's the opportunity and the challenge. And so if you can do that alone, you'll be much better equipped to do it together with someone else who's being difficult. If you can't do it alone, just keep practicing.
That is so empowering. And it also is something that sets you up for success because we never can change anyone else. So so good. All right. Now we have to give our listeners a tangible action, like the lowest hanging, easiest fruit they could pick to act on this. What's something they can do?
Yeah, I would say practice dropping judgments, right? Especially when you're in those conversations, allow for the possibility that you might be wrong, you might be mistaken, you might have misperceived or misconceived something. Just allow for the possibility of that. You don't have to be convinced that you're wrong, and I certainly don't want you in any way to let go of your confidence in yourself. It's not about that. But I would say just practice dropping judgment. At Penn, there was a phenomenal exercise that we were assigned. And the exercise was to keep a moral log. And the moral log we kept was every day, all day for like a week or two, I think, maybe even longer than that. Write down every judgment you have about everything and everybody, like all day. And you can't possibly appreciate how many judgments you make about everything and everybody all day long. Like the traffic light's taking too long, judgment, right? Like life is super short, kind of a judgment, right? I mean, it's like all these, you suddenly discover that most of the mind is made up of nothing but judgment, right?
Wow.
So I'd say you can either practice the moral log, right? Where you just begin to track your judgments, not in a way that's supposed to be self-condemning or self-judgmental, because then you're going to add that to the log. But in a way that's just to help you become aware that, we can be filled with judgment. We can also drop a judgment. Judgment is just a thought can be dropped.
So darn good. A judgment list. Whew. Even if you just do it one day, I think, not even a week, just one day. Wow.
I mean, you nailed it. I remember the first day I did it, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling about notepad. It's like, oh gosh, I'm going to need so many more notepads.
Oh, that is so good. All right, Robert Mack, one final statement. What's possible when we learn how to effectively manage difficult people and or difficult situations?
Oh, everything. Everything is possible. There's nothing that's not possible. I mean, it's a transformation for you, a transformation for the other. There can be a ripple effect, a transformation for the entire world. You don't know the benefit or value, even though I said earlier, don't expect or get attached to the idea that the person has to change overnight. At the same time, they could very well change overnight, right? So it's important to recognize that everything is possible, quite literally. And it doesn't have to come through a whole lot of thoughts or words, okay? Sometimes a difficult conversation is you sitting there, you breathing mindfully, and you saying, okay, thanks for sharing. Move on. So everything is possible, and nothing is not possible.
Wow. Robert Mack, you are a delight. Thank you so much for your time today.
I so appreciate you, Eileen. You have no idea. I just feel infinitely grateful to you. Thanks so much for being so kind and so generous and so wise and insightful all the time, and for having me in the conversation.
Well, as you said, I'm a reflection of what you put out. So thank you.
Thanks, Eileen.
Thank you to everyone at home or on the go for listening. If you find this show meaningful, please hit that follow or subscribe button. It helps more people find what's possible organically. If you have questions about anything we've talked about, please drop me a line at podcast@svchange.com. I read every email I get, whether that's an episode idea, a guest recommendation, or just a simple note to let me know how the show impacted you. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Eileen Schaefer, and I'll see you on the next episode.